Many of you all are neurosurgeons, so compared to the stuff that you all saw right now, this may seem easy. Uh, According to me, it's one of the simplest procedures if it's done well, and it can be the ugliest surgery if it's done badly. So if you can't do a ACDF or you can't make an approach well, then you're in deep trouble as far as your reputation is concerned. Uh, just the basic points of contention are that correct surgical option has to be chosen. We are not going to talk about that. The position has to be correct. Decompression has to be adequate. These are the bullet points, if you may. Appropriate bed graft, correct bone geometry for the graft, and then it's all carpentry. Okay, so let's take it one at a time. As far as positioning is concerned, most of us like to place the patient supine with the head away from the anesthesia trolley. Normally we're used to having the anesthesia at the head end, so the trolley goes at the foot end. There is some kind of restraint for the head so the head doesn't wobble around. Originally we started off from a point where we would hyperextend the neck. So we would keep a roll under the skin and do that. But coming from ACDF to now ACDRs, disc replacement surgeries, a more neutral position is being preferred. So most of us in our careers have moved to a more neutral position. So no real, log roll under the shoulders, no real extension. If it's a fat-necked guy like this, you may want to do a little bit of extension. You may want to tuck his chin up. You may want to pull his hands down. That's a trick that orthopedic surgeons use. You can put a little bandage here and, a white chikat patti, and with a bandage, pull the hands down, or actually strap the shoulders down, not with a dynaplast, but with a white chikat patti. Dynaplast tends to loosen. Okay, by doing so, you're going to expose the neck for the X-ray, and by doing this, you're going to get the double chin out of the way. So these are not great patients to do that surgery, guys with a short neck. Again, the trick that we've used now with ACDR, disc replacement surgery, is that we actually keep a roll under the lordosis of the neck. So when you hammer down, the neck doesn't keep falling back, and the open jaw of the disc doesn't keep closing in. So those are tips that you can you can pick up. Make sure that the C-arm can show you what you want to see before you start the surgery. And hence this rigmarole about the position. AP view also is important, and make sure that the AP is well seen, and that's how the X-ray should be seen before you start your surgery. Now it's very straightforward. You just thrust your hand in. All of you who I would like you to do that, and you can actually feel the spine. Okay, if you cannot, just walk your hand a bit medially. You'll feel the trachea. You know the trachea. All of us know the trachea. And pass your hand along the trachea, and you'll actually feel the spine there. And that's your approach, right? So as you go higher, the approach is going to be, the sternomastoid goes farther away from the trachea, so your approach has to be here. As you go lower, the approach has to be more medial. So if that's your incision, the incision walks like this. Okay. Every time you're lost inside, you find trachea as your friend and use the trachea as your marker to get to the spine. If you get lost, it's normally laterally. So it starts getting ugly once you start going more and more laterally, on the other side of the sternomastoid. So that plane is very easy to find. You got to go into the plane which is laterally defined by the sternomastoid and medially by the trachea, esophagus, and deep is the strap muscles. It's not difficult at all. I'll just, this all you may have read in your, in all your books, but I want to tell you that it always is a horizontal incision. It is never a vertical incision, period. We've done 3-level corpectomies with an incision like this. You never need to do 4-level corpectomies. And the moment you take an incision like this, the scar is going to pucker so much that the patient is not going to be happy ever in his life. And you can't say that boss, ye surgery hai, cosmesis nahi hai. This is right on his face. Okay, so there are nice skin creases here. You can take a wider. Yesterday we did a C7 end block resection with a transverse incision. Okay, so there's no discussion beyond this. And always try to look for the skin crease, because there are 3 skin creases here. You'll find one that's friendly to your level. So after we put the patient down, we take a needle with the cover on it and put it on top, right? So the needle is seen, but the needle doesn't poke the skin. And on C-arm, identify where the level is. So where your C3, 4. So it's all right to say that cricoid, thyroid, etc. But that's a bit variable. So if you do that, okay, this is where C5, 6 seems to be. And look at the nearest skin crease and take a short skin incision. Make a mark that's much shorter than you imagine. Okay, normally your skin incision is going to be the size of your terminal digit. It's not going to be more than that. You can extend it if you wish. Okay, there's no competition for millimeters. All I'm trying to say is that this incision is not warranted. So take it out of your system. After you cut the skin, there's platysma which you need to cut. And then normally there's nothing. You start walking your hand across. Sometimes you'll find these veins that go. They're the anterior jugular, sometimes just random transverse veins. So most of us just bipolar them off or burn them off. Some more diligent of you all can tie them up. But mostly these superficial layer veins are not worrisome. I've had one occasion where the anterior jugular was very superficial and it bled a lot, and we had to finally catch it and ligate it while exposing. Well, after the skin and platysma is cut, you start moving your fingers in. So everybody moves aside and only the surgeon stays there. There are not too many retractors inside to spoil your plane, because if someone starts pulling with a retractor, he creates an abnormal plane. Your fingers, the tips of your fingers, you have to have your nails cut, because if you start doing that, you really need your fingertips. You start dissecting the tissue of the trachea. Every time, air medially. So when you're medial, tracheal ring, that's my friend. Because there's nothing attached to the tracheal ring. All the bad guys are on the lateral side typically. So you start pushing down, and the next thing that you'll find there that's holding you up is the cervical fascia. And that's the investing layer, which again needs to be cut. So that's the next structure. So skin, platysma and investing layer. That's the only three structures that you need to cut. Everything else is dissected with the hand. And at one point, as you kind of, palpatorily find yourself, you'll find the tubercle on the top of the bones. And you say, that's my landmark. Okay? So you directly reach the bone if you cut the skin, platysma and that cervical fascia deeper down. Alright? Now after this, the way to, we spoke about this. These are the standard landmarks which you will find in your textbooks, but like I told you, we really don't much care. I think there's one more thing that you want to know before the surgery is how low the manubrium is. Like yesterday's patient was a C7 en bloc. So we had to take a call whether we had to split the manubrium or do it on top. But on his lateral X-ray, the manubrium was very low. So I think that's the thing that you want to see on the lateral X-ray. How far is the manubrium compared to where your area of work is? Again, short neck people, you might suffer. So you may want to take a lower incision. Right, it's always useful to put a Ryle's tube, because sometimes you get confused in the tubular structures. The Ryle's tube tells you where it is. Which is the esophagus. Okay, now once you're there and feel the bone, the next thing to do is take a right angle retractor and pull the medial structures more medially, because now you're looking for the midline. Okay, you see the bony structures, but you don't know which part of the convexity or of the circumference you're on. You want to be in the midline. And how do you know the midline? There are two longus scoli on both sides. So if the bone is like this, there'll be one flesh here and one flesh here. Whatever is in the middle is the midline. This gets very serious when you're doing a disc replacement. In an ACDF, you can be a bit off, but in a disc replacement, just like doing a knee replacement, you have to have your coordinates right. You can't put the disc off like this. So judging the midline becomes important. So before you start actually, burning on the bone, make sure that you know both the borders of the longus scoli, and hence typically you're too lateral. Typically when you go in, you're too lateral, and you have to really pull the trachea on the other side, and you can put your finger along the globe of the vertebral body, feel the fleshy longus scoli, feel the dip in the midline and a fleshy longus scoli on the other side. Once you do that, the next action is going to be like this. So with your finger or with a peanut, with a wet peanut which is tightly packed, start dissecting supero-inferiorly, caudocranially, and start creating a plane like this. You'll be surprised, you'll get 2-3 bones over there. Then you run your hand down and you'll find mountains and valleys. The midline in the middle of the two longus scoli will be like this. And each mountain is a disc and each valley is the anterior surface of the body. Okay, now with that done, something like that. Now the level. Okay, now after this you have to find the level, and I must submit here, as I always do in a teaching course, I've had 2 wrong level surgeries. Luckily both were in an ACDF, can you believe it? Luckily both were salvaged introp. On both occasions introp we realized, it's wrong level, so it was not a bad situation. But it was ACDF run at the wrong level, and then we had to go to the right level. So level is very important. For level marking, I think most of you would do the same thing. Take an 18 gauge needle, bayonet shape it, so bend it like that in a Z shape. Make sure the tip is the length of the tip is not too long. I've had one occasion where I put it in the disc and CSF came out. So keep a little stub in the front, put the bayonet shaped 18 gauge needle in the disc, coat it with gauze piece so it doesn't wobble around. Take off all your retractors very carefully, making sure that the needle doesn't pop back. Then get a lateral X-ray and make sure that you're on the disc. When you come back in a hurry to take it off, to take the gauze piece off, you lose the needle and you've lost the track again. So someone sits on the needle with a finger, the other guy gently pulls the gauze out, then one guy gently puts one thin retractor, the other one, get your vision, get a cautery, mark that level, and then take the disc out, take the needle out. All right. So once you've got the level right, there are few caution, areas of caution here. The guy who's retracting on the medial side will retract the trachea very well because it's a hard structure. But the esophagus is a populu thing below it, like a floppy structure, and it tends to not go out as one piece, and a fold of the esophagus stays under the retractor, and that can cause serious problem in the future. So make sure that luckily the surgeon is seeing it. So every time you have to say wait, and that guy can't even see it. He's not a bad guy. He just can't see it. So to keep adjusting that retractor below the esophagus. Number two is that if you're putting in self-retaining retractors and you're going to take time in your surgery, there's a chance of necrosis of the tracheal ring or the esophagus. Typically the tracheal ring, because inside there's an ET tube which has got a cuff which has been bloated. That cuff pressure was made before the retractor was put, right, when the patient was being anesthetized. So that cuff pressure was X. Now that you're pushing the trachea from this side, the cuff pressure becomes too much, and there's bilateral. So it's a good idea to, after putting in your self-retaining retractors, ask the anesthetist to deflate the cuff and reinflate it, and they'll find it significantly lower pressure, and that will keep the pressure on the tracheal tube the least. There's one thing that I think I would like your inputs as neurosurgeons. This carotid artery stenosis. A lot of our patients are old and they have atherosclerosis of the carotid artery. We have two occasions when post-surgery in the ensuing 1 or 2 days we had infarcts because something flew off from there. I think it was when we were manipulating with the carotid artery. So it's the verdict is still not out on whether we should screen the carotids of all your ACDFs. We don't do it, but I guess if it's I'd like your inputs on that in the course of this discussion. So basically, recurrent laryngitis is a pure motor nerve. Allegedly, it will never recover if you lose voice. I've had one professor in some institute who has lost his voice forever after doing an ACDF. That's it. And that just doesn't recover. Like 3 years down, 4 years down, they don't recover. But most of ours have recovered. But the textbooks say that it shouldn't recover because of pure motor nerve. So right versus left, you'll be shocked to know, or you'll be happy to know that statistically, right and left has equal incidence of recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy. The only one where I had a palsy was a right-sided approach. For me, I do right-sided if the pathology is left-sided. I do left-sided if the pathology is right-sided. So I'm ambidextrous. I make sure that I keep my practice intact. It's easier to sit on the right side and operate. Means it's easier as a surgeon to access from the right side. It's more hard from the left side. The disadvantage of the left side, advantage of the left side is purely theoretical. So I'm going to let this, let this run, and you decide what you want to do. But like in yesterday's case where we had a chondrosarcoma of C7 right down on the right side, where the recurrent laryngeal was a sucker trap, right? So there I actually called my HFN onco surgeon to help me we actually expose that nerve, and because it was a sucker trap, it was going to go. So we expose the nerve, etc. So in those cases, be more careful. And after this, what you do is quite simple. We are running out of time. So basically, once you've gone down in discectomy, I'll just tell you a few steps. I think I can just skip this and tell you what to do here. How far laterally do you go? The longus coli is your marker. Don't go to once you find both sides of the longus coli, you can go a few mils on either side. But anything more, you start encroaching on the space occupied by the vertebral artery. So then, as you go deep in, you may be in trouble. So that's your lateral marker. As you go in, you can fan out a bit because, as you know, the vertebral artery is a bit more anterior. So as you go in, you see the smile. So once you do the discectomy, you'll see the smile, and that smile is composed of the ancovertebral joints on either side, and that becomes your landmark. So as you do the discectomy, you'll find a disc space like this, but as you go on the sides, it'll close in. These are the ancovertebral joints, beyond which is the vertebral artery, under which is the nerve root. So in a situation where you're doing this surgery for radiculopathy, not myelopathy, you want to see the root, and that's where you can, with a 2-number forward punch, take away the ancovertebral joint and see the root, or with a small burr. If it's for myelopathy, you can just decompress the cord and get out. As far as plating is concerned, make sure that you undersize the plate. We'll discuss this more on the table. Make sure that the upper screw, so when you have two bodies, you can see there, the black is where the screw should go. It should be really, really under. The screw should go so below, like your plate should finish here, literally here. Because it's all fancy to see. This is not a lumbar vertebra, it's a cervical vertebra that's that small in the end. So if you start putting a plate here, you're invariably going to end up encroaching on the disc as you see here. So the plate should actually be from here to here. and the screw should then walk up like that. Okay, so just edge to edge. On the edge, there is a spur of the bone that comes out, so you have to drill it. Otherwise, the plate will become a seesaw. So the bone on the lateral view is like this. You have to burr it down, make it flat so the plate can sit well in the anatomy. And make sure that you use a C-arm, because these cancellous bone screws, they have very poor hold. So make sure that you check on C-arm if the screws are going correctly, because if it's gone badly and then you re-put it, it's going to be a bad screw and you're going to lose your metal of holding this back. Bicortical, I was working in the era when we used to do bicortical screws for everything, for every anterior cervical, but now bicortical, because they are cancellous screws, they have a poor hold, so you want to go to the other cortex, but it's really edgy, it's nervous to put that screw into the dural space. So nowadays there are locking plates with variable angles, locking plates with cuttings, means self-drilling, self-tapping screws, so the whole thing is changed. So now you can just put a plate and put screws and that's that. No drill, no guide, nothing. Okay, so locking plates ensure that the whole construct is one piece, and if it comes out, the 4 screws will protect each other.